We're here. We are back. Hello. This is Laura, or Dr. Laura Beltrán-Rubio, your host. And I'm so excited to finally be here. If you have been here from the beginning, thank you. Apologies for any repetition, especially over the next couple of episodes. If you're new, welcome and thank you for the opportunity. I hope you enjoy this brand new version of Redressing Fashion.
Have you ever imagined fashion being as diverse as human culture? Have you ever dreamed of a respectful, ethical, and socially just fashion industry? Have you ever envisioned sustainability being at the core of the entire fashion system? This is your host, Laura Beltrán-Rubio. I'm a fashion curator, researcher, and educator. My mission is to translate scholarly insights into actionable strategies that we can all take to reshape how we create, wear, and think about fashion. So find a comfortable seat, brew some tea, and open your notebook as you join me in the quest for redressing fashion.
So I decided to take the plunge and launch a podcast after overthinking it for way too long, about a year and a half ago. And it never happened. I mean, it did, but I just wasn't able to produce as much content as I wanted to. And so I left this hanging for way too long. I was basically in paralysis analysis mode. And after lots of conversations with dear friends and mentors and people in the field, and just seeing all the craziness that's going around in the world, and also being more and more inspired by the power of fashion to change our world, which is how I see it, I've decided to come back here. So here I am. And one of the things that I did, please don't hate me for it, is that I am starting anew. So in Spanish, or in Colombia, we call this borrón y cuenta nueva. I basically deleted everything and we're starting again. And very excitingly for me, this is also a video podcast, which I love and I am very excited about, and I hope you enjoy too. But of course, you can also just listen to it if that's how you prefer to listen to podcasts. Whatever works for you, works for you. Okay, so I am trying not to script things too much because I enjoy talking, and I feel, at least when I listen to podcasts, I like it better when it's natural and flowy and conversational. So that's definitely something that I want to bring here. But I did make a bit of a script or an outline just to make sure that I stay in track, just to make sure that I don't go off on too many tangents, and yeah, just to make sure that I say what I need to say today. So, as I told you, this is a sort of new start, fresh start, new beginning. And one of the things that I really want to do is to incorporate all of the learnings that I've had over the past year or so since I created and abandoned almost immediately this podcast, but then also what I've learned about myself more personally and what I want to do, or I guess the role I want to play in the global fashion system. Because again, I do believe that fashion has the power to change lives and change the world, and I want to play an active part in those changes. So that's one of the things. And then the other thing is that I want to make it conversational again, because it's something that I enjoy. So you'll definitely be seeing a lot of that. But before going into what you can expect from this first season of the podcast, I wanted to just take a step back, introduce or reintroduce myself, and share a little bit about what redressing fashion is, what it means, what I envision it as a concept and as a tool, of course, within the podcast, but more broadly as well. So who am I? My name is Dr. Laura Beltrán-Rubio, and I am a fashion storyteller. This is a word that I've been kind of going back and forth about because it feels weird, but I guess telling stories about fashion is what I do in all of the many roles that I take in the different parts of my life. I am a fashion historian and an art historian by training. I am a fashion educator, a curator, a writer, I guess a podcaster as well, social media creator, just a bunch of things. But I think it all comes back to storytelling, and not just any form of storytelling. For me, it is very important to share fashion's true diversity, to go beyond the canon, which is very Western European or Euro North American centric, and really try to understand the whole diversity of expressions that fashion has and has had throughout the history of humanity since pretty much the very beginning of our species. I could go on and on to share my academic journey and my personal journey and read a full blown biography, but I think you can do that yourselves. And I'm actually linking my website and my biography to the show notes if you really want to read it. There's a short version, a long version, you choose. But today I actually want to tell you a story. See, storyteller. And this story is about how I discovered the power of fashion beyond just getting dressed and covering our bodies many years ago. I must have been about 15 or 16. I don't really remember anymore, but there was this barbecue event that my parents wanted to go to. We had been invited as a family. It was hosted by my best friend's family. They are basically my extended family. I'm closer to them than I am to most of my uncles and aunts. So I think that gives you a picture of how close we are. So the event was not necessarily something that I did not want to go to. The thing was that on that same day, the finals for Colombia's national show jumping championships were taking place, and I wanted to go there. First, because a lot of my friends were there, but then also because I was obsessed with horses and show jumping. I guess I still am in a way. That's been a very important part of my life. But then because we had this other thing, I wasn't allowed to go. And I can't remember if I could drive by then or no, but in any case, my parents were like, no, we have this family thing. We are going there. You can't go. You see horses every other day of your life. So just bear it, I guess. And so as an act of rebellion, what I did was that I went there wearing my pajamas. And this led me to several realizations. One of them was that my being a rebel didn't really turn out to be that rebellious, because I don't know if people realized that I was wearing my pajamas. So I remember getting there, and the pants, the trousers of the pajamas had a checked pattern in green and pink. I've always loved pink, you can probably tell. And one of my friends, so another friend that was there too, she was like, oh, I love your pants. And I was like, you're not supposed to love them, they are pajamas. Second, my dad, who was the person that I really wanted to upset, he said nothing about it. Again, I don't know if it realized that those were my pajamas or he just thought that I was wearing some, I don't know, colorful pants. Who knows? And then my mom, she was like, are you really gonna wear this? Okay, whatever, you do you. So basically no one cared about it. I did, but no one else did. And as I've grown up, and especially as I have become a fashion scholar, and as I have learned to analyze and maybe overanalyze what I wear and what people around me wear, and just what people have been wearing for a very long time, I've started to, I think, uncover different layers of meaning within that one act. So wearing my pajamas was my act of rebellion. It wasn't necessarily understood as such, and that was frustrating. But that to me opened new questions. Even before becoming a fashion scholar, I think I was able to connect this very own personal experience with or around getting dressed for this particular occasion and what people interpreted of it versus what I was trying to communicate with it. I could kind of see parallels with other experiences I've had in life or that I'd seen, observed around me. And these experiences were, I think, very much shaped by my mom and my aunt. They are two of the most important figures in my life, especially when it comes to fashion. They owned several iterations of fashion businesses together when I was growing up, so I learned about the industry through them. But then I also learned about fashion, or like my relationship with fashion through them and thanks to them. And some of the things that I also learned through them and through their own relationship with fashion was, for example, that fashion was not a subject worthy of academic rigor or academic study. It wasn't prestigious enough. So there's this story, for example, in my family that my aunt started studying. She went to college for accounting or something like that, and she hated it. And after, I don't know, like a year or so, my mom and my other aunt, they kind of got together. They pursued her to get out of that because that's not what she wanted. And she switched to fashion school, and it was basically sponsored by her sisters. I'm not really sure what my grandmother's involvement was in this, but anyway, she changed. They eventually told my grandfather, and he was very upset. I think he stopped talking to her for like years because fashion was not something that she should be doing. And then there are things about gender, about class, about just social positioning that start unraveling from there. And then on the other side, and especially with my mom, and also considering that I grew up with a very traditional father who, poor soul, I think he has had to suffer a lot with me and my mom and my sister because we are kind of extreme feminists over here. He sometimes complained about how my mom dressed and how involved with fashion we all were. He saw it definitely as superficial, as an unnecessary thing. I'm not really sure that he was very overt. This is something that I've learned to interpret later on, and this is also something that changed later on as I grew up. But when I was little, I remember there was a lot of tension in my household around fashion, and again, very gendered meanings about it that I've later been able to understand better. But yeah, this is just a bit of my experience and how, it all started clicking all of a sudden. And eventually I did go to college, not for fashion, because I was too clever for that, or that's what I forced myself to believe based on all of this upbringing. And at some point, I was very unhappy. I wanted to quit and become a jeweler. Then I thought twice about it because one of the things that I really like to do is read. I also love writing, and I love talking, as you can probably tell. So I decided that becoming a jeweler wasn't going to give me the space to do much of that. So I stayed. I was only like a year away from graduation anyway, so I was like, okay, it's fine. I can survive one more year. And that one more year changed my life because I met one of my best mentors in economic history, who is actually the reason why I am now a fashion historian. And through him, I started also seeing the economic and political relevance of fashion as an industry, as a cultural phenomenon in history and today. And yeah, the rest is history, I guess, is all I can say. I hope to unpack a little bit more of this in future episodes if you're interested. I don't want to get like super deep into it today because that's not the purpose of this episode. But the reason I share this story is because I really want to give some context of who I am, how I got here, and again, try not to be super boring academic because you can read my academic bio elsewhere. So, that's your homework. Let's see. So over this very long trajectory, and also considering that beyond those initial kind of questions, reflections, realizations about fashion that I had since I was a child, I guess, I've also been a proper fashion scholar for more than 12 years now. Wow. It blows my mind that it's been 12 years already. A few things over this past few years have really become clear to me. And there's three in particular that I think are important. The first one is that we need to build more bridges between the fashion industry and fashion academia, and then also consumers of fashion, which is pretty much everyone in this world. And of course, especially among those consumers with people who have a special interest in fashion. The second is that we need to expand knowledge of fashion. So like fashion history, fashion studies, fashion theory, beyond academia, so that they can reach as many people as possible, including designers, including journalists, including people at different levels in the fashion industry who don't really know a lot about this for several reasons that I can also get into at some other point. And then the third one, and that's probably the most important for me, I believe that fashion needs to be changed. Or shall I say redressed, I guess more appropriately for this podcast. And it has to be redressed for good. And the good here, I use it in a double sense. So first, to indicate that fashion should see positive changes, so like good changes, but then also these changes must be permanent. So, we're looking at the long term here. And I think that's also key because many of these changes cannot take shape in the shorter term. All of these three insights are the main reason why I decided to create this podcast, but then also why I've been engaging with public scholarship, as I like to call it, for years now. And it's probably as long as I've been a fashion scholar too. I started my first blog right before moving to New York and, embracing my new life as a fashion scholar back in, 2013 or whatever. And so from these three insights, I think I've started to see what I think is my mission in life. And at least professionally, that mission is to become sort of bridge between these different kind of people, groups, individuals in a way, but then also institutions that are interested in fashion from, again, different angles. Some of them might be directly involved with fashion production systems or like academia, things like that. But then also just people who, get dressed. That's very important too. And that's, I think, where fashion becomes most powerful. And so in embracing that mission, that's how I've become sort of public scholar. But then I think that's also how I've started to see redressing fashion as a thing that's bigger than an initial blog or bigger than a book, even a website. It has to be a whole movement. And so this podcast is part of that movement. But what do I mean by redressing fashion? I think we have to start there. I've been thinking about the many meanings of redressing fashion for several years now. I'm not really sure if this came up in a class as I was writing, as I was trying to propose a paper. I'm not really sure, but it must have been around like 2019 or 2020. The first moment or the first record that I have of redressing fashion as an expression, at least in my memory, is a paper that I presented at a conference at the Chicago Fashion Lyceum. I think it was in 2020, called Redressing Fashion from the Periphery. This later became basically half of a chapter of my dissertation. I've also kind of really worked that into a book chapter for a book that I'm currently writing. And in between those two stages, I also launched a blog or newsletter called Redressing Fashion, where I basically share what I call loose thoughts, which are kind of half-formed explorations and reflections about mostly my scholarship, but then generally other observations and conversations that I have around fashion with students, with colleagues, with friends, etc. And now we have the podcast and a YouTube channel. But then again, I don't think I've answered what it means to redress fashion. And of course, because I'm a nerd, and this is probably where the silly little note about finding your notebook in the introduction of this podcast comes to, I always have a notebook where I can write things, or this thing has become a little bit more useful, especially as I travel the world trying to redress fashion. But anyway, I went to the dictionary to see what redress meant. According to Oxford English Dictionary, to redress is to correct, reform, or abolish a fault or an undesirable state of affairs. As a noun, redress is a reparation or compensation for a wrong or consequent loss. And redress, as in dress plus the re prefix, would be the action of dressing again, with the dressing itself having different connotations and meanings here as well. So what I mean by redressing fashion is actually a little bit of all of those definitions of redress itself. Redressing fashion is finding new ways of dressing ourselves that are more ethical and sustainable, but it is also finding action-based strategies that can actively change the direction and basic functionings of the fashion industry so that they are less harmful to both humans and the world that we live in, including, of course, our more than human kin. And redressing fashion is to provide measurable and quantifiable reparations that compensate for the many damages of the fashion industry and the many, often limited and at times wrongful, stories that we tell about fashion and that we've been told about fashion. Reparations, I think, are key. And reparations also connect very, very specifically with what we as individuals, as consumers, as humans who get dressed can do to actually redress fashion, even if we don't work in the fashion industry, even if we're not fashion scholars. And I think that's key, because that's, again, where I believe that the power of fashion truly lies. And I say this as a fashion academic who has spent a lot of her life writing and producing academic content, but also educating the future of the fashion industry. I think there's only so much we can do through the fashion industry. But I do think that consumers, people who get dressed every day, we have the true power, regardless, again, of whether we are or not in fashion academia or the industry. But why? Why do we need to redress fashion? Well, to put it very briefly, fashion contributes and actually has done for quite a very long time to the colonialist order of the world, which emerged from colonialism but hasn't quite changed since then, even though colonialism technically has ended. And the reason why this happens is because we can trace back to the history of colonialism many of the inequalities and the social injustices and environmental injustices and all other injustices that we witness today in all corners of the world. So no, we don't have to go to a fashion factory in Bangladesh to see inequalities or injustices. They are everywhere. And sometimes they are kind of hiding in plain sight, wherever it is that we live. So because fashion is so closely connected to these colonialist history and just social injustice and all other forms of injustice, I think that we need to redress fashion to basically change our world. I'm convinced of it, and I hope that through this podcast and the future episodes, you will be able to see why, or at least devise more clearly some of these connections. So that's basically what I want to contribute here. I know that I am not the only person who can do this work or even who has been doing this work. I'm definitely stepping on giants here. And honestly, I also sometimes even doubt if I am the right person to lead this, because I am aware and conscious of many of my privileges, which lead to blind spots and oversights. And it's also a huge, huge task. So I know I can't do it alone, which is why I would love this podcast, and I'm actually working to make this podcast as much of a collective kind of project as I can. So I'm your host. I will be here every time, but I want to bring other people into the conversation. This, of course, includes fashion scholars and thought leaders. This includes friends of mine that are down to having profound conversations about fashion with me. And also, I hope to just bring in people who are interested in chatting about fashion again and understanding really what fashion is about, and also understanding the life-changing and world-changing power of fashion. So if you're one of them, do let me know. Just reach out to me on social media or via email, and I'd love to connect and find opportunities to chat. So through these conversations and through, I hope, a few solo episodes, what I'm hoping to do is to share insights that I have acquired as I learn, research, teach, and just share stories about fashion in general, but then also the insights that other people have brought to the table and what they have contributed, or what they are thinking in their different lives through their experiences with fashion, which of course are very, very personal. I'm also expecting to make a difference, which is one of my most important values. And this making a difference is, of course, at an industry level, but then also at a social level. Because again, I do believe that we can create a better world, and I think fashion needs to be central in this creation of a better world. In addition to the interviews or conversations that I hope to have with some of the people that I love and admire, and with some new friends that I'm hoping to make through this podcast, you will also find some resources, ideas, reflections. I've actually been gifted already some books that I hope to review here, and eventually I hope to have conversations with book authors as well. And I'm also hoping to just give you some general considerations and tools that you can apply in your day-to-day life, regardless of the space that you occupy in the fashion system, which, by the way, goes beyond the industry itself. So as consumers and as people who just get dressed every day, we are already part of the fashion system. And I guess that's one of those glossary terms that I should define eventually. And here actually is where that silly part about the notebook, and it can be a digital notebook, comes in. Because one of the things that I love about podcasts is learning. Again, I'm a nerd. There's this one podcast in particular. It's about horses, not about fashion, and not about arts or culture. It is now, I think, defunct, but Noel Floyd's podcast. They had these 3 little things that they would ask interviewees to share towards the end of every podcast episode. And I loved those because it's a way of not just summarizing the podcast episode, but because it also made the lessons and the insights shared in that podcast episode more applicable. And that's one of the things that I want to do here. I don't want to just talk about history, talk about theory of fashion. I want to connect it with our real life experiences, with our dressed experiences. So I'm hoping to bring in 3 little things that we can take and apply, if we so wish, in our lives after each podcast episode. And I was going to say expect that next time, but honestly, I feel that we need 3 little things today as well. These 3 little things are kind of related to what I have said today, but then also not necessarily. So hopefully it'll be unconventional this time because they are not necessarily summarizing the episode. So, 3 little things to redress fashion over the next 2 weeks while we get to the next episode. Number one, I would say, is consider what fashion is to you personally. What does it mean? And where do you think that meaning, those ideas that you have about fashion come from? And how do they maybe connect with bigger social and power structures around us? Number two, think about redressing fashion. This big definition that I gave you a few minutes ago, where I say that redressing fashion has to do with finding new ways to dressing ourselves that are ethical and sustainable, that also change the direction of the industry so that it's less harmful, and providing reparations to everyone who has suffered from fashion, the fashion system, fashion impositions as we know it today. What are some of the strategies that you can think you can take? Even today, just a micro action that you can take. And I would actually love to hear them. So please send them along on social media. And the third little thing that I want to share today is actually more a request than anything else. Please follow this show. I will be sharing new episodes on the second and fourth Thursday of the month for now. And it does make a huge difference if you follow it, if you share it with your friends, if you share it on social media, if you just give a little like here and there if you like what you are listening. It does make a huge difference. It helps me know and understand what you're getting from it, but then it also will help me get more people and more resources to continue producing and creating this into the future. With that, I'll close our first official video episode, and I'll see you again very soon. Thank you for being here. Mwah! Love you.